people are willing to endure levels of hardship that would be completely unacceptable in peacetime. That is just human nature. And it creates an asymmetry that is genuinely dangerous for whoever is on the other side of it. You have a superpower with limited patience fighting against a nation that is prepared to absorb pain indefinitely. That combination has broken empires before. And Putin is not trying to fix this imbalance. He is trying to make it worse. Think about what he gains if the United States stays limited and contained nothing. The situation stays manageable. Ukraine remains the primary focus of Western attention. Europe stays engaged and supportive. Russia faces the full weight of opposition. But the moment the United States commits to a full invasion of Iran, everything changes. Attention gets split. Resources get stretched across multiple theaters, and suddenly the most powerful military alliance in modern history is trying to fight everywhere at once. This is how empires decline. Not through a single catastrophic defeat that everyone can point to, through overextension, through the slow, grinding accumulation of commitments that individually seem manageable, but collectively become impossible to sustain. Putin has studied this. He has watched Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan play out. He has seen the pattern repeat itself. Initial confidence, early military success, then the insurgency begins, the casualties mount, the media narrative shifts, public opinion turns, and what started as a decisive campaign transforms into a quagmire that drains resources, morale, and political capital for years. So, while America is fully consumed by Iran, what does Russia do? It moves. And specifically, it moves toward Odessa. Because Odessa is not just another city on a map. It is the strategic prize that would secure Russia's long-term position in Ukraine and give it control over a critical stretch of the Black Sea coast. Right now, Europe is able to sustain its support for Ukraine because the United States is engaged and focused. But if American attention and resources pivot entirely to the Middle East, Europe is suddenly standing alone. And the uncomfortable reality is that Europe on its own probably cannot maintain that level of support indefinitely. Russia gets a window. And in geopolitics, a window is all you need. But the consequences do not stop at Ukraine. A full American invasion of Iran triggers a chain reaction that reaches every corner of the global system. Energy markets go into shock. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes, becomes a contested zone. Trade routes that have operated with relative stability for decades suddenly become uncertain. And when energy and trade become unstable, every government on the planet is forced to make new calculations about its own security and its own survival. This leads to something much larger than any single conflict. It accelerates the breakdown of the globalized order that the world has been operating under for the past several decades. That system where trade is open, supply chains are global, and security is largely underwritten by American power only functions when that power is stable, focused, and credible. The moment it becomes visibly overstretched, the foundation starts to crack. Countries that have relied on that stability begin to realize they cannot take it for granted anymore. And when that realization sets in, behavior changes fast. You start to see three major shifts happening simultaneously. The first is a reversal of the economic logic that has governed global trade. Countries that built their prosperity on cheap energy and seamless global supply chains suddenly find themselves exposed. So, they begin rebuilding domestic capacity, not because it is efficient or profitable in the short term, but because they can no longer afford to be dependent on systems they cannot control. This is already starting to happen. It will accelerate dramatically if the Middle East ignites further. The second shift is the fragmentation of global trade into localized blocks. Instead of one interconnected world market, you get several competing spheres of influence. Countries trade within networks built on trust, proximity, and shared strategic interest, rather than pure economic efficiency. What you're describing is not just a regional crisis, it's the early stage of a systemic shift in how the world organizes power. As global tensions intensify, the structure that once held the international system together begins to loosen. Interdependence, once the stabilizing force that made large-scale conflict economically irrational, is slowly eroding. In its place, a more fragmented, inward-looking world starts to emerge. Countries begin prioritizing resilience over efficiency, sovereignty over integration, and security over cooperation. The result is a global environment that is not only more divided, but also significantly more volatile, where misunderstandings carry greater consequences and escalation becomes harder to control. One of the most profound consequences of this shift is remilitarization. As confidence in a stable, US-anchored global order declines, nations are no longer willing to assume that security guarantees will hold indefinitely. Defense budgets begin to rise. Military capabilities are expanded and modernized. Countries that once relied on alliances or distant powers for protection now feel compelled to take responsibility for their own defense. This is not necessarily driven by aggression, but by uncertainty. However, when this mindset spreads globally, it creates a dangerous environment, one where the sheer number of armed, alert, and suspicious actors increases the probability of miscalculation. Conflicts no longer require intent. They can emerge from accidents, misread signals, or rapid escalations that spiral beyond control. From the perspective of Vladimir Putin, these developments are not setbacks, they are strategic opportunities. For decades, Russia has operated within a system largely shaped and constrained by Western dominance, particularly that of the United States and its allies. A unified Western bloc, backed by strong institutions and coordinated policy, has limited Russia's ability to project power freely. But a fragmented world tells a different story. In a multipolar environment where influence is divided among several competing centers, Russia gains room to maneuver. It can pursue its regional ambitions with reduced risk of unified opposition, leverage its energy exports as strategic tools rather than mere commodities, and reassert itself not as a challenger, but as a central player in shaping global outcomes. This is why patience, rather than aggression, appears to define Putin's strategic posture. He does not need to act decisively or escalate dramatically. Instead, he benefits from allowing existing dynamics to unfold. The longer instability persists without resolution, the greater the chance that competing powers, particularly the United States, make decisions under pressure that lead to overextension. A full-scale ground invasion of Iran would represent such a decision. It would demand enormous military, political, and economic resources, while simultaneously diverting attention from other critical theaters, including Ukraine, for Russia. This creates a strategic window, an opportunity to consolidate gains and shift the balance of power without directly provoking confrontation. Underestimating the difficulty of such a conflict would be a serious mistake. History has repeatedly shown that technological superiority does not guarantee quick or decisive victories. Conflicts like the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan demonstrate how initial military success can evolve into prolonged, resource-draining engagements. Iran presents an even more complex challenge. Its geography is vast and difficult to control. Its military doctrine is designed around decentralization and resilience, and its asymmetric capabilities, ranging from missile systems to proxy networks, are specifically tailored to counter a more technologically advanced adversary. Even in the unlikely event of a conventional victory, the aftermath would likely involve a prolonged and unstable occupation with all the political and logistical challenges that entails. When viewed from a broader perspective, what emerges is not chaos, but a pattern, one that reflects structural pressures rather than isolated decisions. The situation resembles a trap, not because it has been actively constructed by a single actor, but because it arises naturally from historical tendencies, strategic incentives, and human behavior under stress. Vladimir Putin does not need to force events in any particular direction. He only needs to observe and wait, allowing the internal dynamics of the system to guide decision-making in ways that may ultimately serve Russian interests. Crucially, none of this is inevitable. Outcomes at this scale are determined by choices, deliberate, conscious decisions made by leaders in moments of uncertainty. The United States still retains the ability to define limited objectives, declare success, and step back from deeper entanglement. That option remains viable, but it becomes harder to exercise with each escalation. Every additional commitment narrows the space for de-escalation. Every casualty increases domestic pressure for further action. Over time, the logic of the conflict can begin to override strategic intent, pulling decision makers toward paths they might not have chosen under different circumstances. This gradual loss of flexibility is precisely the threshold that strategic competitors may be watching for. Not a single dramatic turning point, but a quiet transition when engagement becomes entrapment and when withdrawal is no longer politically or strategically feasible. At that stage, the central question shifts. It is no longer about winning individual battles, but about sustaining a global position under mounting strain. Can a nation maintain its influence across multiple regions while managing economic pressure, domestic fatigue, and external competition simultaneously? History suggests that the decline of great powers rarely comes through sudden collapse. More often, it is the result of slow erosion, an accumulation of commitments, miscalculations, and structural weaknesses that gradually undermine stability. The concern, then, is not simply what is happening in one region, but how interconnected pressures are converging across the global system. While attention remains fixed on immediate crises, broader transformations may be unfolding in the background, reshaping the balance